Hello my friends, and today I'm going to be doing a ASMR book tag Q&A kind of thing. Um, I'm pretty late to the party on this, but I saw Rose Garden ASMR had done it, and I really like her videos, so I went back to the source and saw ASMR Florida set it up. So I want to thank her for taking the time to do that, and I'm just going to use this as kind of a Q&A thing anyway about reading, but all credit to her. Um, she even posted like a PDF kind of thing for the questions, so I think it's really cool. So yeah, let's get started. So question one is, when did you start reading and what's your relationship to reading? So I think I talked about this a little bit in my previous video, but I can't remember when I started reading. I started reading very young. My dad was a big reader. He actually got me into like fantasy and sci-fi from a really young age. He used to paint Warhammer, and I did as well. I still do occasionally, but that was kind of my avenue into fantasy and sci-fi, so I was just reading like loads and loads of children's fantasy and sci-fi. And I mentioned in a previous video that my main kind of series were the Edge Chronicles, and I really liked Mortal Engines as well. But I was just reading all the time. And then I got into video games, kind of fell out of it. And then really only recently I've been reading consistently. And that was kind of a conscious effort on my part. I really wanted to read more, because I missed it, and I wanted to write a book, so that includes a lot of reading. So now I'm reading quite a lot, and I'm happy to do that. I'm having a lot of joy from it. So yeah, I guess that's my relationship to reading. I've kind of come around full circle, and now I'm reading a lot of fantasy and sci-fi like I did in my youth. So, question two. Do you have a reading goal this year? What is it, and do you think you reach it? Yeah, I did have a reading goal. Well, I still do. It was my New Year's resolution, was to read a book a week. I even set up like a spreadsheet, but I kind of fell off halfway through the year, and I'm really behind. And I could catch up if I read like 2 books a week for the rest of the year. But I don't think that's really a pressure I want to put on myself, because I'm enjoying reading at the moment just at my current pace. So I think it was a good kind of catalyst to get me reading much more. I know I don't think I'll reach that goal, but it doesn't really bother me that much. Well, at all really. It's just been a good impetus for me to start reading more consistently, and I'm doing that now, challenge or not, you know. So I guess you could say I failed my New Year's resolution, but I'm not too torn up about it. Question three. What genre do you enjoy reading the most, and why? This actually changes quite a lot. And this is going to be a bit of a theme with all the favourite kind of questions on this list. It just changes too much. But my favourite genre at the moment is fantasy sci-fi, and I kind of lump them in together, as a lot of people do, and maybe that's not really fair. But the book I'm writing is a mixture of fantasy and sci-fi, so for me they're kind of the same. didn't always used to be like this. Like I said, in my youth I used to read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. But then when I went to university, I kind of felt the, not pressure, but expectation maybe, that I'd read a lot more literary fiction. And I still do occasionally. You know, like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and I always preferred Russian to English authors and French authors. So if you would have asked me a few years ago, I would have said, I don't know, literary fiction, even if it's not really a genre. Or classics, I guess. But right now it's definitely fantasy and sci-fi. I enjoy reading this genre particularly because it's what I'm writing, so that's always a good help. But also, it's always something I've been attracted to, you know, the idea of other worlds, and I think because my connection to gaming as well, a lot of those are fantasy and sci-fi. I've always found other worlds much more interesting than, I guess I would say my least favourite kind of genre is books that are set now. I don't know why, it's just kind of, I enjoy the fantasy aspect of fantasy and the escapism. What's your favourite book of all time and why is question 4. And again, this would change like year to year. I would have said Anna Karenina, and I probably would if I had to, but right now it's Dune by Frank Herbert. I have a copy here. I actually really love this cover as well. It's the 50th anniversary edition, and I just think it's a really cool cover. It's kind of cut-out effect of the Sandman. This, in my opinion, is the best fantasy or sci-fi book ever written. If you haven't read it, I would really recommend you read it. I haven't seen the film yet because I wanted to reread this book first, and it's actually the next book on my list. So when this video goes out, I'll be reading it now. It's just so visionary, because this is written before like Star Wars and all the fantasy we know and love and all the sci-fi we know and love. Can't remember the actual publication date. Let me just find out. (1966) in Great Britain, so it might have been before then. But yeah, it's just a very visionary book. He kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. The world building is just like unbeatable. I think that's the strongest aspect of this book, is the world building, because it actually has quite a strange narrative technique. Actually, I'm kind of rambling about this. I should talk about it in a different video, but it's definitely Dune at the moment, and it always has been in this genre anyway. So yes, Dune by Frank Herbert. I'm sure everyone's heard of it, but give it a read if you haven't already. And question 5. What's the worst book you've ever read? This was really difficult for me, because usually I know if I'm going to like a book, and I just won't read it if I'm not going to like it, obviously, and if I don't like it, I have no problem with putting it down. like a few pages in. There's so many books to read, like, you don't need to read ones you don't like. So I couldn't really think of a fiction one, but I did think of a non-fiction one, and it's called The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker. And this is actually a very popular book, very well received book in all kinds of circles. But I had to review it for a course in my master's degree on military history, and I just found it really badly researched. Essentially the premise is that the world has gotten a lot less violent, a lot safer over the centuries, and I just took issue with a lot of his research technique and his referencing. So it's kind of a boring reason to not like a book, but for me, it just wasn't a very good book. It was poorly researched, and I didn't like the conclusions he was drawing, because I thought they were kind of whitewashing a lot of bad things that were happening. I'm trying to be vague about it because you kind of get really into the weeds if you talk about this book. It's a very big book, it's a very technical book. But anyway, yeah, it's my least favourite book, I would say. Number 6. What is your favourite book-related trigger? And it's definitely tapping, but I'm going to be doing that whenever I pick up a book in this video. So my second favourite is the kind of, I don't even know what you call this. It seems really strange to say stroking a book, but you know, that's what it is, I guess. Someone commented that it sounds like a washing machine. I thought that was really funny. And then number 7. Who's your favourite author and what draws you to their writing? Again, this changes all the time, but I think recently, even though I've only read one book of his, you know, it's in 2 parts, but it is one book, it'd definitely be Brandon Sanderson. I'm reading his Stormlight Archive series, and I've got a lot to read of him, but I'm really looking forward to reading his other books, and I think that's a really good sign. And apart from his actual fiction work, I really like his writing lectures on YouTube. I think that's part of why I really like him as an author. He really shares his knowledge and his passion for his writing. And obviously, his writing is excellent as well. You know, he's really famous for his world building, but his characters are just really great as well. Very 3-dimensional characters. So yeah, Brandon Sanderson. Number 8. What book has had the biggest impact on your life? I think this one, it's over here. This was a difficult one, but I think I would have to say, you know, it's really hard to read, but it says the Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. And there's a lovely googly-eyed dog there as well. yeah, so this would fall in, I guess, like literary fiction. It's a book about, well, it's not very helpful, but it's a book about like everything. It's one of those books that's like about the meaning of life. So it's really hard to describe. You know, ostensibly it's a kind of love story set over decades, but really it's just a kind of dialogue about the meaning of life and if our decisions matter and how we can make decisions without knowing the future. And I'm really doing a bad job of describing it, but it's quite a difficult book to read because it's very dense. It's not very technical, but it's just quite heavy, despite the title. But I really love this book, and I guess you could say the impact it had on my life was very subtle, and very hard to describe, but it's just kind of a way of viewing life in a more nuanced way, and seeing consistencies and incidents as positive things. I would have to like write an essay to actually describe my thoughts properly on this book, but yeah, I've done a terrible job there. But this is the book that's had the most impact on my life, just in the way I live it. The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Okay, some of the easiest questions. Number 9. Do you prefer reading physical books or ebooks? This is an easy one, definitely physical books. I just enjoy the feeling of holding a book and, you know, the smell and the texture, but also just seeing your progress as your bookmark like slowly moves through the end and the book gets kind of more pliable and flexible as you read it and you break the spine. I just enjoy all those tactile elements of reading a physical book. I do read ebooks if I have to, either if because the actual physical book is like kind of rare or expensive, or if it's a very short book. If it's something like The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, which is kind of a non-fiction self-help kind of book, it's quite short. I actually just read that on a PDF on my computer, which I wouldn't usually do, but I don't really have anything against it at all, just a preference. And then number 10, how do you choose which book to read next? So I actually usually have like the next 4 or 5 books lined up, just because I know what I want to read. It's just deciding which order I'm going to do it, and I decide that just by, it's informed by what I've just read, basically. Like if I want to read more of the genre or the author that I've just read, I'll add that, and then I'll, you know, kind of jig the reading order. I guess you could say I'm not really a mood reader. I quite kind of a structured reader, but I'm free to, you know, change the order in which I read the books, but I usually have a pretty good idea of what books I want to read. Number 11. Do you have any reading habits or rituals? I don't think there are rituals. I do the same thing every day with reading, which is I wake up at 5:30 and I will get a cafetiere coffee, that one there, and come up and sit in this chair and read for about an hour. and then I will have breakfast and go to work. And I do that every day, even on the weekends, just because it's the quiet time of the morning. It's a really enjoyable experience for me, to have that like hot coffee and the silence, and just to open a book and have that first hour of the day be uninterrupted and this purely reading time. And then I don't feel bad if I don't have time to read for the rest of the day because I've already done a bit, so that's something I consciously set up. So I guess that is a kind of ritual, but it's one that I really enjoy, and I do it every day. Number 12. Do you annotate your books? If yes, what's your method? So I've actually never annotated books. Even when I was in university, I just didn't get any benefit from annotation or highlighting. What I would do is write or type out specific references or quotes from the book on a separate document. Just because then I could easily copy paste into an essay, and it's good for recall. It just helps me to remember it by writing it out, much more than annotating or highlighting would, because I would usually not go back to that page again, so I wouldn't even see my annotation. And I definitely don't do it now because I'm almost exclusively reading fiction and I don't see the value in it, personally. Number 13. What's a quote from a book you still think about often? And this is an interesting one, actually. I don't really have many, but I think one of the most quotable authors I've ever read is Charles Bukowski. He's an American mid-century author I really enjoy. He's a very unique character, and he just has a very biting sense of wit, and I find him very funny, very tragic, very motivational, all of those things. He's really one of my favourite people, even though he's probably a terrible person. And I think one of my favourite quotes he said is from a poetry collection called The People Look Like Flowers at Last. And he said, you have to die a few times before you can really live. I think it's just a really beautiful sentiment, and it really expresses what I believe in, that kind of life is a series of recreations of your identity. The way I live my life, at least, is I'm a very different person year to year. I embody different identities and ways of being, and I think the process of life is a lot of killing off of your old identity and creating a new one. And I don't know if that's what he meant by this, but that's what I draw from the quote. But he has a lot of quotes like that are very, that can be interpreted in many different ways, like do what you love and let it kill you. But yeah, I think his poetry is very good, and his writing as well. So that's what quote I would go back to. So number 14. What's the last book you read that you couldn't put down? And this is definitely, this was literally the second to last book I read, and it was Altered Carbon by Richard Morgan. This is just a very good cyberpunk thriller. And it's made into a TV show, which is also very good. Um, but yeah, the way it's written, it's very fast-paced, very twisty, very turny. And yeah, it's just a very exciting book. There's a lot of action, there's a lot of quick dialogue and twists, like I said. So yeah, if you're looking for a fast read, it's actually quite a long book. It's just under 500 pages, but very fast read. Number 15. What's a book you've read recently that surprised you? I'd actually say The Shining by Stephen King. This is the first Stephen King book I ever read. That's the only one I've actually ever read, which I'm going to change soon. But I didn't really know what to expect from Stephen King. I kind of expected pretty pulpy, quite straightforward, page-turning writing. But he's actually, I mean, I guess this isn't surprising, but he's actually an excellent writer. He's very descriptive, he's a lot more flowery than I thought he'd be, I guess you could say, which I really like. I wasn't expecting the writing to be that good. I was expecting it to be good, obviously, because, he's one of the most famous authors ever. But it really just surprised me how well he wrote. Yeah, so I'd say Stephen King really surprised me. But I guess he shouldn't really. I mean, everyone loves him. But yeah. Number 16. What's the book that disappointed you? This is actually the most recent book I read, and it's called Exhalation by Ted Chiang. And this is a collection of short stories in the science fiction genre. It's kind of like near future science fiction, I guess. And the closest thing I guess you could say, if you've ever seen the British television show called Black Mirror, it's kind of a more upbeat version of that. So it deals with new technologies and how they would affect the lives of people. Like, he's dealing with pretty classic sci-fi, I guess you could call them tropes, like time travel, knowledge of the future, AI, and it just didn't really live up to what I thought it was going to be, because it actually has, I don't know if you can read that, it's got a recommendation by Barack Obama, and just like so many raving reviews, like there's just pages of them, and I thought it was just an alright book. It didn't really wow me, so it's not really his fault, obviously, but I thought it was okay. So I was a little bit disappointed. If Barack Obama says it's a good book, then I was expecting a bit more. But yeah, no shade on Ted Chiang. It's a good book, it's just not as good as I thought it was going to be. Number 17. I don't know if I'm doing this like really slowly or really quickly. I can't remember. What book do you think has the prettiest cover? And I actually think it's in my collection, obviously. I actually really like Life of Pi, this edition. I just think it's a very artistic cover. Just the colours, the blue of the ocean, orange of the tiger, and the white of the boat, and the dark skin of the child, and just the composition of this cover I think it's really nice. You know, the way it all flows as well with the fish. Yeah, I think this is my favourite in my collection. Number 18. Which book in your collection has the tingliest cover? And this is actually, it's an old edition of the collected fiction of Albert Camus, obviously without its jacket. And I just love the kind of texture it has. It creates a lot of different sounds that you don't find on other books. Quite a thuddy kind of tap. I just really like this one. Even though, you know, technically it's not a cover, but number 19. What book do you think has the ugliest cover? Right before I say this, I really love Terry Pratchett. I think he's an excellent author. I just don't like these artworks. I don't know what it is, it's just, they're so busy. They're so busy, they're so colourful. And the character's just ugly. It's just the style of the author. John Kirby is apparently the illustrator. I'm sure lots of people love these covers. It's just, for me, it's like too much. You can see the witch, the girl. She's called Esmeralda or something. I can't remember. And the wizard. It's just like very garish. And I prefer simpler covers, more stylized covers, as I think you could probably tell. But yeah, Terry Pratchett is an excellent author, so no shade on him. Number 20. What is your favourite trope? I thought about this one a little bit actually, and I think I have to go with kind of, I couldn't even think of a literary example. You have to kind of comment if you can think of one. But I love the idea of a grizzled, oh my god, can you hear that ice cream man? A grizzled warrior, like an older warrior, you know, who's now in charge of kind of an innocent, I guess like young teen kind of character. And they kind of, the child kind of gets them to open up and they form like a bond that's quite parental. I really enjoy that dynamic. And the best one I could think of was, if you ever seen the film Leon, it's about like a grizzled hitman and a teenage girl, and he kind of like assumes reluctantly a fatherly kind of role. Yeah, I just really enjoy that dynamic, but I can't think of a literary example. I don't know why. 21. What's a book you've read that you would recommend to everyone? And I thought about this one quite a bit as well, and I thought it has to be Slaughterhouse-Five. So number 1, it's a very short book. It's 160 pages, but it's an absolute classic. You know, Vonnegut is a classic author as well. American mid-century author. This is a very anti-war book, but it's much more than that. This again is kind of about the meaning of life and our decisions and our actions, and it's just amazing how much he gets into such a short book. And for me, why I'd recommend this one is because if you wanted to get into reading, you know, some more literary fiction, some classics, this is definitely a great entry point. Because it's so short and it's very readable, and it's about something that's very relatable, you know, the horrors of war and, well, not relatable, but I don't know, understandable, I guess you could say, sympathetic. So yeah, I would definitely recommend Slaughterhouse 5 if you wanted to get into mid-century American fiction, post-war fiction, or just kind of like modern classics in general. And question 22. Do you prefer standalone books or series, and why? I'm pretty 50-50 on this one, to be honest. I think I prefer standalone books just because it gives me the opportunity to read more from different authors and different genres. Once you're in a series, feel kind of locked in, you know, obviously you can take breaks, but you want to read the next one. And if it's like 9 books, it's just a lot of time that you're not reading other authors, which can be fine if you really love that author, but I love variety in my reading. So yeah. Alright, number 23. Do you have a favourite book to movie adaptation? I think this would actually be a TV series, and the book I was just discussing, Altered Carbon, it has a Netflix series, and I've only watched the first series. I actually watched it before I read the book, but it's actually really good, and it follows the book very closely. It has the same kind of energy as the book. I think they're both great pieces of media, and I think it's actually one of the better, probably the best adaptation I've seen of a book into a TV series, so give it a go. I think it's still on Netflix, but it was very good. And number 24. What's a book that you've been meaning to read for a long time but haven't gotten around to yet? So actually I have this one. This is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. And I've actually never read any Neil Gaiman, even though he's a very well regarded author. And this is a kind of fantasy, contemporary fantasy book. I've heard great things about it. I do want to read it. It's quite long. You know, I think it's over 700 pages. And it's kind of in a setting that doesn't really interest me. You know, it's America, like contemporary America. But it's very well regarded. I do want to read it. It's just getting around to it. Eventually I will. Also, I don't really like this cover. But yeah. And then, question 25. Do you have a particular book that you like to revisit or reread every few years? And I've spoken about this before. It's Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. You know, because it's kind of a philosophy book. You can dip in and out of it when you're looking for kind of advice or guidance. So yeah, I don't really reread it cover to cover, but I definitely dip into it now and again. And then quickfire. Fiction or non-fiction? Definitely fiction. Hardcover or paperback? Paperback 99% of the time. Hardcover is just kind of awkward to hold. Romance or thrillers? Definitely thrillers. Comedy or tragedy? Tragedy. I've very rarely actually read any comedy books, or light-hearted books, I guess you could say. Classics or contemporary? Right now, definitely contemporary. Library or bookstore? Definitely library. I honestly don't know how people read in a bookstore. Indoors or outdoors? Outdoors if it's quiet and warm. Sofa or bed? 100% sofa. I don't ever read in bed actually. In silence or with musical sounds? Definitely in silence. And then BookTok or BookTube. I don't use TikTok, so it has to be BookTube. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed that. Hope it didn't upset anyone too much. Maybe if you liked my recommendations, give them a go. I really enjoyed making this video, so thanks again to ASMR Fleur. I'll link below if you haven't heard of her, but you probably have. So yeah, thanks again. Hope you have a wonderful day or night, and I'll see you next time.